The first set of training that we're going to go through is for VLOOKUPs. It's arguably the most basic of formulas available in Excel, and it is probably one of the most commonly used formulas too. So we will work through the 3 questions here. The first covers just a basic VLOOKUP. The following 2 build on the VLOOKUP so you can see the ways it can be used in larger formulas. For the most part, in this, it's still all very, very basic. So, starting question A, question 1, we are going to answer the question. So what is the question? Use a VLOOKUP to pull through the locations of the following people on the tab VLOOKUP data. So the data tabs are all highlighted in yellow. So this is the VLOOKUP data tab. So first name is Ben. Let's have a look. So first type equals into the cell and then type VLOOKUP. You can either type an opening bracket or you can select VLOOKUP from the formula list. Typically, as you start typing in Excel, you will see all of the different formulas starting with the letters that you're typing in the list. If, for example, we just typed V, we can see VLOOKUP there. We could just select it from the list like that as well. So the first part of the VLOOKUP is to look up value. What you're saying is you're going to tell Excel the value it's searching for. So in the instance of this question, we're telling Excel the name that we want it to find. The name we first want it to find is Ben. So I'm going to select cell B2. You could also have just typed B2 in there, in the formula bar. Next, to move on to the next part of the formula, hit the comma key, and you'll see that the second part of the formula becomes bold. Whatever part of the formula is bold is the part that you are on currently. So we're now going to tell it the table array. The table array is the data table that it's going to be searching for the name Ben in. So if I just click on the VLOOKUP data tab, it takes us over here. Now, the table that you search within will always begin with the column that contains the data you are looking up. This is a very short list. Typically, if you're using VLOOKUPs, you're using them on larger lists because it makes it a lot faster. Now, you can see that the names fall in column A, and so column A is the first column in our table array. I will select all columns for the purpose of this. We could have stopped at the column D, which is the location, since we know it's the location data that we want to look up. However, if we want to copy this formula and use it elsewhere, it is handy to keep the table listed. Now, there are other things to know about Excel formulas and the different components, but we will build on those as we move through the next 2 questions. Now, we've selected our data table, so the table array, and we're happy with that. So now if we press the comma key, we move on to the next part of the formula, and that's the column index number. So what does that mean? It means, well, in your table, A to F, what column number is the location? So we know column A would be 1, B is 2, C is 3, and D is 4. Therefore, since location is in column D, we will pop the number 4. If, for example, the question was asking you for the age of Ben instead of the location of Ben, you would select, or you would enter number 5 to tell it to pick up column 5. Now, the final part of the formula is the range lookup. Now, it is inside of these squared off brackets because it means it's an optional part of the formula. However, I always complete optional parts of the VLOOKUP formula, and every other version of a VLOOKUP I've ever seen also does. The reason why is because you need to be sure that it matches Ben exactly and it returns the values that are exactly for Ben. If you don't tell it to give you an exact match, you will not be able to trust your results. So if I enter a comma to move on to the final part of the formula, you see we have two options. True for approximate match is one that I don't see used. And if you do use true, you will not be able to rely on the output of your data. However, if you use false, you will get an exact match. And so if it finds Ben's name, it will give you the exact data returned. However, if it doesn't find Ben's name, it will just give you an error message. Whereas if you click true, you sometimes will get results even when the person's name or whatever the data is you're looking up does not exist. So you can either select false, type false, or, and this is what is most commonly used in Excel formulas, you just type the number 0. 0 gives you exact matches. If you type the number 1, it gives you the true approximate match. I know it is confusing because for me, I would expect that true would be the exact match, but this is how Excel works. If I now close the bracket and press enter, you can see that we now have Ben's location, and we can just manually check per the list, Ben's location is south. So question 1, or part 1 of question A answered. Now, we could be lazy and we could copy the formula down. So we could select all the fields and we could paste, or we could just paste to the one below. So if we go and look up Mariah, we see that her location is north, which matches the location pulled through. Now, I did mention that there are other ways of doing the VLOOKUP and selecting your table data range. So let's just go through it quickly with Ashley. So I'm going to say equals VLOOKUP, and Ashley is who we want to look up. I'm going to enter the comma. Now we're looking up in this table here. However, this time, instead of selecting columns A to F, I'm going to select the exact table data range. So we have selected A1 to F8. I'm going to press comma. The column index number will still be column 4. It is still looking between columns A and F, and the location in column D is still the 4th column along. So I'm going to type in number 4, and as will always be the case with VLOOKUPs, because as I said, in my experience, I have never ever used approximate match. We're going to enter 0 for exact match. Wherever you use an Excel formula and you see this optional true and false, 0 will always equal false, and you should always select it. Now, instead of manually typing in the close bracket and closing it off, I'm just going to hit enter, and we get the same results. Now, to demonstrate why it's not always a good idea to do this and to leave the table range as you see it here, I'm going to copy this formula down for the rest of the people on the list. In fact, I'm going to copy the formula down to the rest of the people on the list. And what you see, as we tab down through the list, you will notice the VLOOKUP data table range is moving. In instances where you have a really long list, so say this list, just for example, let's put Ben back down here, and this is purely for illustrative purposes. If I then copy this formula, it says NA. NA is an error message. It means I've been unable to find Ben in that table range, and so I can't give you any result. I give you an error. The reason why is because as we've copied the table range down and it's kept moving down rows, once it got to Ben, it was fine trying to find him in cell A7 to F14. Now, of course, A7 to F14 is this range here, and Ben does not exist. So that is why if you select your data table range, like we have here, and you just select the specific range instead of selecting the columns, you must lock the cells. You can lock the cells by pressing F4, and you want to make sure that you lock both parts of it. Now, there are various ways that you can lock cells, and depending on how you want to copy your formulas around, you will only need to lock part of the cells. However, this is probably for someone who's operating at a more advanced level, and as you progress and you use Excel more frequently, you will become more familiar with how these things work. So we won't go into that in much detail, but it is something that you can play around with. Now, if I press enter to accept that formula, and I now copy this down, what we see is that the formula remains the same in terms of the data table that it is looking in. So, as you can see, it works perfectly. Now we're getting an error for the name Jason. And the reason why is because Jason doesn't actually appear in the list. And so it is expected that it returns this error. Now, I added Ben for illustrative purposes, so I'm going to take him off. Now, there are many different ways that we can use an Excel formula. So let's move on to the second part of the Vlookup equation. So what we're saying here is we're saying use a Vlookup to pull through the age of the following people on the tab Vlookup data. If the persons are not found, then the value returned should be not found. What that basically means is up here when we found Jason, or rather when we didn't find Jason, we were thrown out an error message. Instead of seeing this error, which looks horrible and can be very unsightly on documents, we actually want it to give us words. So we want it to say not found. So in a normal world, if this was a working paper and we were working on something, I would not retype a formula here. I know that this formula works. I know that it's looking at the same data. So it's looking up the name, it's looking in the same data table, and I know that we've highlighted the entire data table. So the lazy thing to do is to copy the formula from above and paste it. The first thing that you will notice is that you are still seeing the location. So what we need to do is we need to change the column that it's looking at so that it looks at the age instead of the location. Now, if the location, column D, is the fourth column, then the age, column E, is the fifth column. So really, really simple, really lazy. In here, and the column index number, we're just going to take out the 4 and we're going to replace it with a 5. And here we have view of Ben's age. Now, we can copy this formula down and paste, and we'll see the ages of everybody, but we still have this issue that we're seeing NA because we have an error. And what we actually need is for it to say not found. So coming back to the first formula, because whenever you're working with formulas, it's good to have them consistent. So if, for example, the formulas in column E are all doing the same thing, and you make an amendment down on row 21 to incorporate something else that's additional that applies to row 21, you should paste it over all other formulas. If the formula in row 21 was trying to achieve something entirely different to the remaining formulas in that column, I wouldn't put it in that column altogether. I would create a new column for the new formula. If this is confusing to you, remove it from your head. It's something that will make more sense once you're used to using Excel. So back at the first formula in this question section, what this is asking us to do is it's asking us to use an add-on to a formula called an if-error. Now, an if-error formula can be used with any formula at all. And the idea is that you are saying, if you get an error in the formula, then give this. What do I mean? And what does this look like? It looks like this. In front of your formula, the VLOOKUP formula you've already typed, type in if error and open the bracket. Now, as with all formulas, you get the Excel little help key. The help is showing that the first part of the formula past the open bracket is the value. So the value being the formula could be any formula. It doesn't have to be a VLOOKUP. It could be a sum if, a count if, an if statement, an index formula. It could be any single formula. And it can be any single combination of formulas. Again, as your work with Excel becomes more advanced and as you get access and look at more documents, you are likely to see bigger formulas being put inside if error statements. So you see the cheat key for the first part of the formula all the way up until the point where you cross the threshold into the new brackets. The brackets for the formula within the formula. So when you have a formula within another formula, then they're referred to as nested. Commonly, formulas, an if statement, which we will go through later, is a very common formula where you'll often see very long nested formulas. So what that means is you will have an if statement inside an if statement inside an if statement, but that's for another video. So we don't want to amend the VLOOKUP. We know the VLOOKUP is fine. The great thing about Excel is it color codes the brackets. So where you see the opening bracket for VLOOKUP is red, the closing bracket for the VLOOKUP is also red. So this opening bracket here that's black, it presently doesn't have an offsetting closing bracket. We would see a black bracket if it did. So we need to finish off the formula. Now, the VLOOKUP is the first part of the formula. So if I click on the other side of the brackets, you will see that we are back inside the key for the if error. So I'm going to hit the comma to move on to the final part of if error. Now, if, for example, you were looking at a table and you were using a VLOOKUP to fill out numbers in the table, you probably don't want words to be shown when the result is not found. You will either want it to be number 0, in which case you will just type 0, like so. And if we copy this down, you see if instead of saying NA because it couldn't find Jason, it's now saying 0 because I've said if error. So if the VLOOKUP statement is an error, then give me the number 0. However, that's not what we're asking for here. We're asking for it to say not found. So we need to replace that. So first of all, when you want Excel to give you text and you're burying the text inside of a formula, you need to put parentheses at either side. So opening, and I'm going to put not found, and then put another closing parentheses and then close the bracket to indicate that the formula is done. And as you see, we get the offsetting black closing bracket. The opening and closing bracket of a formula string will always be black. You can have multiple different formulas inside that will have different color brackets, but once you have closed the formula in its entirety, you will have a black closing bracket. Now, if I copy that and paste it over, we have the results as we wanted them to see. Sometimes you don't want that, and you actually just want it to return a blank cell, at which case you will just have opening and closing parentheses with nothing in between, not even a space. So copy and paste, and as you see, you get a blank result. However, the question does not want that. It wants it to say not found, and so we leave it as not found. Ooh. Now, on to the final part of the formula. Slightly more complex. We're saying that the following employees, those of them that have children, are entitled to a £1,000 bonus for every child. So, using a VLOOKUP, we need to calculate the bonuses receivable by each of them. So, if we know that they get £1,000 for every child that they have, then we need to find out how many children that they have. So, we're going to do another VLOOKUP, and I'll type this one from scratch just so that we can go through the steps again. So it's going to be equals VLOOKUP. So lookup value, great. I want you to find Ben. Table array, great. I want you to find Ben in this table array, great. Next, and sometimes you'll find that this moves around depending on where you start the formula. You will also reach the point where you don't need help. I do not need to refer to these very often. Certainly not with a VLOOKUP. Once you've used VLOOKUPs multiple times, you will also not pay attention to this. So next, we're on to the column index number. Now, the number of children is the 6th column from the name. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we're going to say column 6, and then we're going to want an exact match, which is false or 0. Now, you can type a closing bracket and press enter, or you can just hit enter and it does it for you automatically. So we know that Ben has 1 child. Copy that down. Now, we can see Mariah has 4, Ashley and Paul have 0, Dan has 1, Nick has 2, and Adam has 1. So we know they get a $1,000 bonus for each child they have. Really, really basic way to do this would be to have another column here where you say equals the number of children times 1,000. And you could copy that down. However, it's messy. It makes documents really hard to follow. And the best way to present data is with as little unnecessary data showing as possible. So instead of breaking this formula down into 2 columns as we've done here, we can actually just incorporate the entire requirement into the formula here. So now that we know we're pulling through the number of children, and we know that it's $1,000 for each child, all that we have to do is, at the end of the formula, tag on times 1,000 and press enter. If we copy that down, we see the bonus for each person per child. Similarly, if we delete that from the end, we also could have done 1,000 times and then times the VLOOKUP formula, and the result is the same. That is VLOOKUPs in a nutshell, and it is the most basic use of them. If you have questions, please reach out.